UFC 258, two former teammates go to war as welterweight champion, the Nigerian nightmare Camaru Usman takes on former training partner Gelbert Burns for UFC gold. Undefeated in the UFC, welterweight king Camaru Usman has vanquished every challenge he has faced inside the octagon. Camaru Usman! That's how you finish a fight! And after dismantling the BMF Jorge Masvidal on Fight Island, a clear contender has emerged. Gelbert Burns is known for his fight-ending technique. But the Brazilian's evolution as a mixed martial artist has also seen him develop devastating striking power. Massive knockout! Gelbert Burns! Dorino's in love with that knockout life! At UFC 258, these two former teammates will do battle when Dorino faces the nightmare for welterweight gold. Hello and welcome to UFC Inside the Octagon. John Gooden alongside a very special guest analyst for this one, Laura Sanko. Laura, how you doing?
I'm doing well, John. I'm excited to be here. I had always noticed that Dan Hardy had big feet, but now trying to fill his shoes, even for one day, they are even bigger than I thought, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you for this one, and what a fight we are going to be breaking down. UFC 258. It is for the welterweight gold between the reigning champion Camaru Usman and the challenger Gelbert Burns. So much to talk about in this one, but top line, Laura, former teammates vying for that golden belt. This is going to be big.
It's going to be huge, and the fact that they are teammates colors this entire discussion that we're about to have. It's a huge factor in every facet of this fight, and you just can't understate how much of a factor that's going to be as the fight plays out. But I think only these two really know how big of a factor it's going to be.
Yeah, can't wait to get into it. So, as we always do, let's go to the facts and the stats. Put these two fighters side by side and see what we can take from these physical sizes and also some of the wonderful achievements that they've already had within the UFC and beyond. And two fighters in their prime, of course. We have the champion with the big gold belt over his shoulder, taking on the number 2 contender in the world. But I think the big thing that jumps off the page for me here, Laura, is the physical size, particularly the reach for Camaru Usman.
Oh, it's an absolutely massive reach advantage that he has here. 6.5 inches. You can't understate how big of a factor that can be potentially in these stand-up exchanges. That is, to my knowledge, the biggest reach disadvantage that Gelbert Burns has had in recent memory, perhaps ever. And, you know, with the way that Usman fights, I think he's going to really use that and lean on that to his advantage, particularly in those striking exchanges.
And as we go down through their credentials, both of these guys are on wonderful streaks. You know, Usman, I think he's got the longest active win streak right now in the UFC. But at the same time, Gelbert Burns undefeated since he moved up to 170 pounds. But their background, Laura, we have two fighters that were the very best, if you like, in their respective arts. We have Camaru Usman in his wrestling, and then Gelbert Burns as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter.
Yeah, and that's really the story of this fight, right? The grappling versus the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling versus the wrestling. They each are able to do all of those things, but they have their preferred art that they're bringing to the table here. But I think what really fascinates me about this and what's really impressive about each of their respective games is that, you know, Camaru Usman has done a phenomenal job of transitioning his collegiate wrestling into MMA. He uses it to the nth degree in almost every single fight that we've, seen him have inside the octagon. And Gelbert Burns the same way. You know, a lot of guys can have all of the BJJ accolades in the world, but we don't always see that translate one for one into being able to implement that in the context of MMA, in the context of the octagon. But for Gelbert Burns, he absolutely does it. He has it always in his back pocket, but he has a lot of other weapons as well.
Yeah, both of these guys trained under the great Henry Hooft as well, and we just know that kickboxing pedigree that they both will bring into this one is very much top draw. So let's peel back the covers on this and get into the details, shall we, Laura? And we'll start with the champion. Now, the wonderful thing about this, you said it in the open there, both of these fighters know how this could go. They have more information on this fight than any of us do, which is fantastic. But we only have what's available to us, and that is the evidence of work within the octagon. And for Camaru Usman, I'm interested to know how you think he's going to start this fight.
Well, I think, any fight, as we all know, starts on the feet. Every round, every fight, you start working at space, standing up. And I think a key for Camaru Usman in this fight is in those exchanges when they're striking in the open mat, it's going to be for him to stay long. And what I mean by that is use that reach advantage that he has to the fullest extent that he possibly can. And he does. He has a reach advantage in many of his fights. And he does a phenomenal job of staying behind the jab, using those long lead weapons to really keep his opponent at bay. But when you think about that in the context of one of his other greatest weapons, his volume, he lands 4.5 significant strikes per minute. And when you put that in the context of the fact that you're talking about a grappling heavy game, it's really impressive. I mean, Camaru Usman is going out there and he's laying a lot of volume and a lot of pressure on people. And as a result, he also comes away with this strike differential that he has. His ability to land significant strikes and absorb far fewer of them. And we saw a great example of that when he was fighting Colby Covington. So in that fight, we all thought that they were going to be wrestling. We thought that there was going to be takedowns galore, but there were basically none. It was a kickboxing match, right? And Camaru Usman did a phenomenal job of keeping Colby Covington outside of his range and right at the end of where Camaru Usman's range was. And he did that with the jab. He did that with the front kicks. And he did a great job of also, landing some really long hooks to the body and just frustrating Colby and forcing him to miss. And I tell you what, there's nothing more exhausting than being outside of someone's range. Your punches are missing, but their jab is landing. I think that that's going to be very important for him in this fight.
One thing I've also noted from my research on the champion is he does such a good job of forcing his opponents up against the fence, and when he gets them there, it's very, very difficult for them to get out of those kind of ranges. So if you do end up in that position as Gelbert Burns, what has he shown us that he can do to get out of those sorts of those danger areas?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think it is critical for Gelbert Burns to keep himself off of the fence. There's this game that we play as kids here in the United States. I don't know if it translates to the UK market, but it's called The Floor is Lava. And I feel like in this fight, Gelbert has to sort of, in a sense, play the fence is lava. He cannot allow himself to be funneled against the fence and controlled where all of his weapons are dismantled and disabled. And Camaru has done a phenomenal job of that in past fights. So really, it's up to Gelbert Burns to use better footwork, better angles, tight combinations to keep him from being able to do that. But a really phenomenal example that I think of with someone doing that is actually Gelbert Burns doing that to Tyron Woodley. I mean, he did such an amazing job of shutting Tyron Woodley's game down. Every time Tyron would look to move laterally, Gelbert was always a step ahead of him, not following him, but cutting him off on the cage. And although Tyron often puts himself against the cage, he likes to fight with his back foot there, the fact that Gelbert Burns was pressuring him so heavily against the octagon like that really prevented Tyron Woodley from implementing his game. And that's exactly what Camaru Usman is going to be trying to do to Gelbert Burns. And so Burns has to use the footwork, and he's got to be able to keep this fight out in the open mat where he can have more success.
So we're talking about two fighters who are, the very best at their chosen strategies and with their skill sets as well. And you just ended there with the champ and how he wants to try and get Gelbert into these positions. So how might he approach that?
Well, he's so good at it. I mean, he's the best at doing this. And that is, I think, going to be a key part of his strategy is the flip side of that coin. He's going to be trying to put Gelbert on the fence the entirety of this fight, I believe. Although I do think that they will have some exchanges, kickboxing-wise. Kamaru Usman wants to get this fight to the cage, to the ground, and keep his opponent, keep Gelbert Burns in purgatory, keep him in no man's land, where your back is smashed up against the fence. You feel like you've got a cheese grater behind you as you're trying to move. And Camaru Usman is just so powerful in these positions. Not only can he land shots, but then he can mix in, the threat of the takedown, the actual takedown, and push what I like to refer to as the up-down cardio of the opponent. And I know that Gelbert Burns has a great gas tank. I know that he can grapple for long periods of time and not get tired. But when you are the person initiating the grappling, you're also the one in control of the gas tank in those moments. So to make Gelbert Burns work to get back up, only to take him down again, to get back up, only to take him down again, is going to be a very, very important exercise for Camaru Usman, and potentially a really frustrating situation for Gelbert Burns to be put in, because even though Gelbert Burns probably doesn't mind getting put on the canvas in this fight, when you're put in the canvas in that 90-degree angle of where the fence meets the octagon, it really shuts down his ability to get his BJJ game going. And when you saw the fight with Jorge Masvidal, Jorge looked so frustrated. Now, he took the fight, of course, on short notice, but Jorge has excellent grappling, he's got excellent wrestling, but he really wants to be in space striking, and Camaru Usman basically took that option completely off of the table, put him up against the fence, was taking him down, nullifying his submission attempts, landing those foot stomps that we all were talking about after that fight. It was just, it's like watching artistry. He's so good at doing it, and I know sometimes that the audiences can get a little bit, feisty watching those exchanges, and some people would call it boring, but there's artistry to it, and there's a lot of fight IQ going on there for sure.
We have so much more coming up on the other side. We're going to take a break right now, but do join us after this. Welcome back to UFC Inside the Octagon, where we're breaking down the big main event at UFC 258 for the welterweight title between the champion Camaru Usman and Gelbert Burns. These two know each other very, very well. They've trained for some 10 years together. Now, in part one, Laura was describing how she thinks the champion might open the fight, fighting long with that jab and that front kick as well. He's got a significant reach advantage, and as that fight develops, he's trying to get Gelbert Burns against the fence where he can do lots of damage. Foot stomps were mentioned, but there were some more devastating weapons that we know from Usman. So it will be key for Gelbert Burns to get out of those positions and use that masterful footwork that he's learned under the tutelage of Henry Hoof. But we must go on from here, Laura, and I've got to ask, how do you feel like Gelbert gets the upper hand in this contest?
Well, you might be surprised to hear this, because I think often the consensus is that when you fight Camaru Usman, you're not looking to implement your own wrestling. But I actually think that in this particular matchup, it's going to be key for Gelbert Burns to mix in the takedowns. He has phenomenal wrestling, and I think the fact that we really haven't seen Kamaru's wrestling tested, because most people are not trying to engage him in that way. Now, Damian Maia was sure trying. He went 0 for 15 on his takedowns, and Damian Maia, one of the best BJJ practitioners out there, but not the best wrestler. Gelbert Burns is that amazing BJJ practitioner, but he also has the wrestling. And even as I'm talking about this, John, it makes me think, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in some of their practices, because
Oh, for sure.
they're gonna know. They're gonna know, and Gelbert Burns is gonna know whether he's had some success doing that to Camaru Usman in practice. But we've seen him have success with it in other fights. He has magnificent timing on his double leg. His open mat wrestling is excellent. His on the fence wrestling is excellent. But that beautiful double leg that he landed against Tyron Woodley was just an absolute thing of beauty. And you have to keep in mind that going into that fight with Tyron Woodley, Tyron had historically some of the best takedown defense in the history of the UFC. And Gelbert Burns went out there and said, you know what? I'm going to test his wrestling. And he found success there. And from that point in the fight on, Tyron Woodley had to be thinking about the takedown. And that's probably not a thought that Tyron Woodley was used to having in a fight. And so I can imagine that if Burns can get a takedown on Camaru Usman, it's going to mean a major victory, not only strategically in the fight, but just mentally. And here's the other thing, okay? What's the worst case scenario? If you fail at your takedown and you end up on bottom, that's exactly where Gelbert Burns wouldn't mind being anyway. He has a phenomenal bottom game. So it's really a win-win situation as long as he is careful with his entries and doesn't eat any, big shots while he's closing the distance. I really feel like Gelbert mixing in the takedowns, mixing in the level changes, not only might get this fight where he wants it on the canvas, but it's going to open up opportunities for him to land those powerful strikes, those game-changing strikes that we've seen him land in the past.
I'm very interested to see this. We hear the narrative regarding wrestlers not being happy off of their back, and of course Camaru Usman's been on his back for like 2 seconds in his UFC career, so we don't know how he's going to react. So for sure, if Burns can put him in that situation, that definitely could be a game changer. But what else have we got from Burns? Give me an X factor that you might see in this one as well.
Well, it feels a bit trite, it's sort of the strike du jour these days, but I do think that the calf kick potentially could be a really big weapon for Gelbert Burns in this fight, and we've seen him land it really successfully in past fights. He was absolutely eating up the leg of Alexei Kunchenko, a fight, where he took that fight very last minute notice against an excellent striker. So for him to have so much success in a kicking game against another kicker, I think really speaks to the kicking game of Gelbert Burns, and you see that when you look at his statistics. It is a very big part of his game. A huge proportion of his strikes overall are kicks. But when you're fighting a wrestler, you're probably not going to be wanting to aim at the leg. You can go high with the head, but a great setup to going high with the head is to chew up that lead leg of your opponent, particularly when they're the wrestler. It slows down the shot. And I'll be honest, it hurts like absolute HE double hockey sticks. I mean, we've seen, it's a type of strike where, when landed properly, one well-placed calf kick can change the tenor of a fight. So I think that could potentially be a key thing for Gelbert Burns to be doing in this fight as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that Kunchenko fight, because for me it really was the sort of turning point. It was when Gelbert was putting his hand in the air to say he was willing to take any opportunity that was given to him. And Kunchenko, if my memory serves me correctly, I think he was like 20-0 coming into that fight. So like super solid competition, and he went out there without a camp really, and got the win. So and that's really put him on this trajectory. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that fight. So we got to finish with the champion then, Laura. And you've spoken about his long range fighting and how he gets people up against the fence, but he does some ridiculously deadly work as well when he gets it down in top position.
This is the crux to everything that Camaru Usman tries to do. When he gets you on the ground, which if past his pro lag, he's going to get you on the ground. And I think, honestly, if we're going to talk about this fight in an honest way, we in some respects have to assume that at some point he's going to be able to get Gelbert Burns down, because in past fights, when that has been something that he has wanted to do, which he didn't want to do apparently against Colby Covington, he's been successful in doing it. And when he's able to implement that, when he is able to get his game going, it's just a thing to behold. And I think back to his fight with RDA, where he just absolutely smothered him against the fence and on the ground. And RDA, phenomenal counter wrestling, excellent BJJ, and Camaru Usman shut every aspect of it down, not only in taking him down, but staying active on top, never allowing himself to settle into positions, and therefore letting RDA settle into a position and find a wrist that he could trap, a way that he could pivot out and start to work that bottom game. Camaru Usman lands hellfire from the top position, the ground and pound, and he's constantly moving, he's constantly passing and looking to advance his position. And if Camaru Usman can control Gelbert Burns on the ground and control the wrist, I think that that's going to be a big part of controlling Gelbert Burns on the ground. It's a very dangerous place to be with Gelbert Burns, but if Camaru Usman can take the better of that portion of the fight, I think he can win the fight there.
We've got to talk about the fact that these two have trained so closely together for so very long. I think Usman was the first one at Black Zillions, and if I'm correct, he was brought in as like the wrestling guy who was helping a lot of the others that have been on that team for more senior veterans, if you like. And a little later, Gelbert Burns came on as the jiu-jitsu guy, and these two have been helping one another with their respective games. They were great training partners as well, and I know that Camaru Usman has actually cornered Gelbert Burns in the past, so very close, Laura. The other thing is, those rounds, it can't be 50-50, right? Or can it? Like, someone knows, those two know who got the better, but does that even matter when it's for real, with 4-ounce gloves and a title on the line?
I absolutely think it matters, and I think that as we kind of alluded to earlier in the show, only they know. Even the guys at Sanford MMA who have watched all of these rounds unfold, they have certainly a better understanding of it than you and I do. But honestly, only Gelbert and Kamaru know what those exchanges have been and how they truly played out, because anyone, and you know this, John, from training as well, there are times where you're going with a guy where you're not going 100%, and there are moments, even within sparring rounds where you're taking care of your partner, where you do turn it up, and you know in the back of your mind, I got him in that moment, or Gelbert knows in the back of his mind, I got the takedown on Camaru Usman. Camaru Usman knows, I defended that submission. I know how he sets up all of his submissions, right? And Gelbert Burns is thinking, I know all of the takedowns that he favors, the entries that he uses. So the fact that these two are teammates, it colors everything about this fight, and it makes me think back to, some of the Team Alpha Male rivalries where we've seen high-profile fighters have to fight each other from that camp. And it is such a fascinating thing, particularly because there doesn't seem to be any animosity whatsoever. In fact, there's a real layer of respect between these two, but then kind of colored with a respect for one's own game at the same time. And